the Great Depression explained. How America lost everything in 24 hours, Black Tuesday. How the stock market crash created the Great Depression. You woke up rich. Went to bed, broke the Great Depression, explained you woke up rich on Monday morning. By Tuesday night, you were completely broke. No war, no warning. Just a terrifying market crash that wiped out $200 billion in wealth and sent America spiraling into a decade of hunger, dust storms, and absolute desperation. This is the Great Depression, the worst economic disaster in modern history. And the scariest part, we learned nothing from it. So what the hell actually happened? Let's rewind to the party before everything collapsed. Imagine waking up in 1922. The Great War is finally over. Men are wearing the most ridiculous mustaches you've ever seen. And the American economy. It's absolutely Factories that spent years manufacturing tanks and ammunition are now churning out toasters, vacuum cleaners, and the kind of refrigerators that make iceboxers look like peasant technology. New York's skyline shoots upward like it's on performance-enhancing drugs. Jazz music becomes the cultural equivalent of Wi-Fi. It's loud. It's everywhere. And honestly, nobody fully understands how it actually works. The economy is legitimately booming. People genuinely believe the good times will last forever. Even professional economists are confidently saying things like, "Trust me, this decade is absolutely roaring, and the engines of economic growth are humming along perfectly." The Model T automobile rolls off Henry Ford's revolutionary assembly lines faster than anyone thought possible. What used to take 12 hours to build now takes 90 minutes. Cars flood American streets, auto plants explode with unprecedented demand, and every linked industry gets violently pulled into the slipstream: oil, steel, rubber, glass, leather. The American economy isn't just growing steadily. It's revving like an engine with no governor. As cities flourish with electricity and consumer luxuries, America falls completely in love with new gadgets, especially radios. By 1929, 10 million American homes have radios. That means 10 million homes now get to hear both Al Jolson and 30 different soap advertisements in glorious AM radio fuzz. But while urban cities are throwing the party of the century, rural America is struggling desperately just to get on the dance floor. Farmers who were once rich from wartime agricultural demand now face plummeting crop prices. So they borrow money to modernize their operations. But those shiny new tractors don't save them from bankruptcy. They just help them go broke slightly faster and with more expensive equipment. Meanwhile, urban America discovers its new favorite hobby: buying stuff they absolutely cannot afford. Welcome to the era of buy now, pay maybe never. Want a radio? Finance it over 12 months. A car? Finance it over 2 years. Stock in a company that manufactures hats specifically for dogs? Definitely finance that too. Banks, absolutely thrilled by this innovative new business model, offer installment payment plans to literally anyone with a detectable pulse. It's the financial equivalent of saying, "Sure, I'll marry you." We've been on exactly 2 dates. But the true beating heart of the mania lies on Wall Street. The stock market becomes Disneyland for adults with gambling problems. Margin loans let absolutely anyone buy $100 worth of stock with just $10 down. The remaining $90. Who cares about that? It's the future. Stocks only go up, right? Everyone knows that. Even your barber knew. Trust me, kid, utilities are absolutely hot right now. I personally made a killing in socks. You mean stocks? Sure. Stocks? You're still cutting hair for a living, though. Yes. But spiritually, I'm a Wall Street tycoon. You know, things have reached peak insanity when your barber, your butcher, and probably your dog are all giving unsolicited stock tips. Shoe shine boys. Pitch can't miss investment opportunities to millionaire bankers. A hotel bellboy confidently tells a Vanderbilt to immediately dump all his railroad stocks and go all in on pencil manufacturing. Between 1924 and 1929, the Dow Jones Industrial Average literally quadruples in value. Stock prices break completely free from gravity and fundamentals. Why bother looking at actual company profits when you can just look at vibes? This line on the chart is going up. and so is my self-esteem. It's perfect. Companies get increasingly creative with financial engineering, too. They set up elaborate holding companies that own other holding companies that own absolutely nothing except more stock certificates. It's just carefully arranged layers of nothing wrapped in hype and speculation. A few responsible people actually try to sound alarm bells. Economist Roger Babson publicly warns in September 19, a serious crash is definitely coming. Wall Street's immediate response: buy even more stock and tell Roger to go touch grass. The jazz band starts playing even louder. Dollar bills literally rained from the sky at parties. Nobody can hear his warnings over the deafening sound of cash registers and unbridled optimism. Meanwhile, behind all the champagne and jazz music, serious structural cracks are rapidly forming. Rural debt climbs dangerously. Consumer debt balloons to unprecedented levels. The economy is partying right on a cliff's edge, and absolutely nobody is bothering to check if the floorboards can actually hold this much weight. But hey, don't worry about it. It's 1929. What could possibly go wrong? October 29th, America woke up rich and went to bed completely broke. That single day would go down in history as Black Tuesday. The day the stock market didn't just fall or decline, it performed a flawless 10-meter Olympic dive directly into solid concrete. The Dow plummeted catastrophically. Ticker tape machines spit out endless red numbers like they were possessed by demons. Phones rang continuously without stopping. Men in expensive suits screamed into telephones. Traders physically fainted on the floor. One guy reportedly suffered a heart attack, somehow recovered, looked at his portfolio value, and immediately had another heart attack. $14 billion of wealth vanished in a single day. Just gone. Completely evaporated. Adjusted for inflation, that's over $200 billion in today's money. Not monopoly money, real homes, life savings, college funds, hopes, dreams, and futures. Gone. Sell everything immediately. Everything except my Patagonia vest. It's literally all I have left. Outside the New York Stock Exchange, massive crowds gathered in stunned, heavy silence. Some people held hands. Others cried openly. Most just stared blankly at the ground, desperately trying to understand how an entire economy had tripped violently over its own shoulders. The Roaring Twenties hadn't just ended gracefully. They had face-planted at full speed into a brick wall while carrying everyone's retirement plans. And that catastrophic crash was just the beginning of the nightmare. The crash triggered a devastating chain reaction. First came the margin calls. During the boom years, people had been buying stocks with borrowed money. Put $10 down, get $100 worth of shares. Sounds great, until the market tanks 40% and your broker suddenly demands the other $90 immediately. Investors scrambled desperately. Many had absolutely nothing left to repay. Paper fortunes vanished overnight. People who had been genuinely rich on Monday morning were completely bankrupt by Thursday afternoon. Bankers who had spent the entire summer drinking expensive martinis at country clubs now sat alone in their offices, staring at balance sheets like they were written in ancient Greek. And then came the banks. Oh God, the banks. These supposedly grand institutions, pillars of community trust with marble floors and oak desks. Turns out they were built entirely on worthless paper and blind optimism. As the stock market imploded spectacularly, banks couldn't recover their loans. So they did the obvious thing. They collapsed, and the people panicked. They didn't jog, didn't briskly walk. They ran in absolute terror. Bank runs broke out like wildfire across the country. Massive crowds surged outside local bank branches, violently banging on locked doors, screaming desperately for their life savings. Inside, terrified tellers tried uselessly to calm them down. Everyone, please, your money is completely safe here, okay? Not completely safe. Entire families lost absolutely everything. Grandpa's war bonds, worthless. Aunt Margaret's life savings vanished. Little Timmy's piggy bank was still technically full, but only because no one had the heart to tell him he was now the wealthiest person in the entire household. The economic disaster didn't stop politely at America's shores. Panicking, U.S. banks urgently called in all their overseas loans. European economies already barely held together with duct tape after World War I, were thrown into an industrial blender. Germany's fragile post-war recovery completely collapsed. Britain wobbled dangerously. Global trade, once the great flowing artery of prosperity, choked violently and fell by 50% in just 3 years. And yet, amidst all the panic came aggressive denial. Newspapers printed absurdly sunny headlines. Market adjusts as smart investors take reasonable profits. Right below that headline, a photo of a desperate man pawning his wedding ring to buy bread. Politicians insisted repeatedly the worst was definitely over. Bankers in expensive silk vests smiled nervously into radio microphones, delivering the financial equivalent of, "We're totally fine. Nothing's on fire here." President Herbert Hoover appeared on national radio broadcasts, calm as ever, repeatedly assuring the American people that the economy is fundamentally sound. Meanwhile, millions of families sat at completely empty dinner tables and wondered which part of that confident sentence was supposed to help them eat. And still, the broken system didn't stop. It just staggered forward blindly, broken, clueless, pretending everything was fine. The stock market crash wasn't the bottom. It was just the terrifying beginning, and what waited below in the depths. That's where things get genuinely dark. By 1931, the music was completely gone. The lights were permanently off. The party was definitively over. And what came next wasn't peaceful silence. It was the horrifying sound of factories grinding to a permanent halt, of fathers whispering apologies they never imagined they'd have to say, of America collectively exhaling all at once and realizing it had nothing left to breathe in. Unemployment soared catastrophically to 25%. 1 in every 4 Americans who desperately wanted to work simply couldn't find jobs. Jobs vanished like smoke. Detroit, once America's industrial crown jewel, watched its massive auto plants shutter one by one. Production collapsed by 75%. The great assembly line machines stopped turning. The lights dimmed, and the men who once proudly assembled the American dream stood outside factory gates and waited. For what? They honestly didn't know. Cities sagged under the crushing weight of desperate need. Breadlines, endless and eerily quiet, snaked through downtowns. Mothers lined up at dawn for a single bowl of thin, watery soup. Children looked on, too young to understand why breakfast had become an unattainable luxury. Teachers reported students fainting in class, not from boredom, but from actual hunger. They hadn't eaten in days. America wasn't starving metaphorically, it was starving literally. Desperation crept into every room. Banks had failed. Savings were gone. Human dignity was thinning dangerously. The suicide rate surged. Newspapers actually stopped printing obituaries. They couldn't keep up. Behind every cold statistic was a name. Behind every name was someone who had once believed that this country would take care of them. Marriage rates collapsed. Birth rates fell dramatically. The future had become something people actively avoided discussing. Who could reasonably dream of weddings and children when they couldn't guarantee their own dinner? And just when it seemed things couldn't possibly get worse, the sky turned black. In the Great Plains, years of aggressive farming had stripped the land completely bare. When the rain stopped falling, the soil cracked. Then came the winds. Massive dust storms swept across the heartland, towering, choking, biblical. Black blizzards, they were called, and they didn't just cover the ground. They literally blotted out the sun. Crops were buried alive. Livestock suffocated, homes filled completely with dust. Families coughed through the night and woke up entirely coated in the earth that used to feed them. Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas. Millions fled westward. They packed everything they still owned into broken-down cars and drove desperately west, chasing rumors of jobs and land that hadn't yet turned to sand. California or bust, the hand-painted signs read. But, for most families, it was just bust. In Washington, President Hoover tried desperately to hold the center. He encouraged volunteerism, offered modest relief programs. He even launched the Hoover Dam, an engineering marvel. But a concrete dam couldn't feed the hungry in Chicago or shelter homeless families in St. Louis. He stubbornly refused large-scale federal aid, called it dangerous, called it un-American. But by then, Suffering people had stopped listening. His name became bitter shorthand for suffering. Hoovervilles, shantytowns made of scrap and cardboard. Hoover blankets, newspapers used desperately for warmth. Hoover flags' empty pockets turned inside out. His legacy wasn't just concrete and engineering. It was cold, hunger, and dust. And then something cracked. Summer 1932. Thousands of World War I veterans, desperate and forgotten, marched to Washington. They had been promised bonuses for their military service, but not until decades later. They needed them now. They built a peaceful tent city outside the Capitol and waited respectfully. Congress said, "No." Hoover sighed, "No." And then the U.S. Army came with orders. I fought for this country. So did I. Tear gas was fired into the crowd. Camps were burned. Families fled into the smoke. The government had turned its weapons on its own war heroes. And for the first time, Americans watched in absolute disbelief, not just at what was happening, but at who they had become as a nation. Radicalism spread rapidly. Socialist rallies, communist recruitment, not because people believed in Marx's theory, but because capitalism had left them with nothing but hunger. Crime surged dramatically. Bank robbers like John Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde weren't seen as villains. They were folk heroes, people who struck back at the institutions that had betrayed everyone else. America wasn't just financially broke. It was spiritually broken. And yet, even then, something held. Not belief, not optimism, but pure endurance. People didn't give up. They migrated and they lined up. They held their families together. Sorba, not because they were certain things would get better, but because they had absolutely no other choice. But the question remained, in a country that once promised endless growth, what was left when the growth stopped, and who, if anyone, could lead them out of the wreckage? By March 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt stood at the podium for his inauguration. Millions leaned in desperately. "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself," is sighed firmly. Not gold, not banks, not even dust. Fear. It was more than just a speech. It was the first deep breath the country had taken in years. Roosevelt didn't wait or hesitate. Within weeks, young men in threadbare clothes were handed shovels, tents, and genuine purpose. The Civilian Conservation Corps put them to work. "You're here to plant trees and save the country." In that order, yes. The Works Progress Administration soon followed. Millions were hired to build roads, bridges, schools, and post offices. They didn't just rebuild infrastructure. They rebuilt pride. People who had once stood in breadlines now stood on scaffolding, lifting steel into the sky. In the Tennessee Valley, FDR launched the TVA dams, went up. Lights flicked on. Whole towns that had lived in darkness began to glow. Families gathered around radios, not because they could finally afford one, but because for the first time they had electricity to plug one in. Slowly, unmistakably, life stirred again. GDP rose. Unemployment crept downward. The dust settled, literally and figuratively. People dared to imagine a future again, but FDR didn't stop at jobs. He wanted to fix the machine, not just oil it temporarily. So he built rules, the SEC to keep Wall Street from doing Wall Street things ever again, the FDIC to protect your money from disappearing. Banks reopened, but this time people weren't running in to withdraw everything in panic. They were depositing quietly, hopefully. Then came Social Security. It didn't make anyone rich. It didn't need to. It said, "You matter. We'll remember you. You won't have to work until you physically collapse." It wasn't flashy, but it was monumental. Even the arts got support. The Federal Arts Project paid painters, photographers, and writers to capture the soul of a recovering nation. One photo, Migrant Mother by Dorothea Lenya, became the face of it all. Her eyes didn't say, "We're saved." They said, "We're surviving." Hollywood chimed in too. People packed into theaters to watch The Wizard of Oz, where a gray world turned to color. In the middle of a depression, Americans still dared to dream. Maybe more than ever. Cities buzzed again, restaurants reopened, radios played swing music, and if you squinted just a little, the skyline looked like it was rising again. In the distance, factories started humming. But tis time, not just with consumer goods. Helmets, boots, ammunition, the world was shifting again. And America was starting to stir, not just for recovery, but for something bigger. The Great Depression didn't end with a celebration. It ended with work, with blistered hands and tired backs, with legislation, hope, and a little jazz, with a nation that had collapsed, choosing piece by piece to rise again. But as America stood back up, it didn't realize that something else was already on the horizon, something darker, louder, and global. And this time, the whole world would feel it. The Great Depression destroyed America and forced it to rebuild from nothing. Hit subscribe to see more stories about the moments that changed history. Comment below. Could it happen again? Are we learning from the past? Thanks for watching.